over the rest of the day. But first of all, we're going to be discussing the FT Business Education Rankings, notably the Global MBA, our flagship ranking that was just published earlier this month to try to identify the attributes and the leaders and the trends among the top global MBA business schools around the world. So I'm joined by Leo Cremonesi, my colleague at the FT, who's our rankings manager. Hello, Leo. Good to see you.
Hello. Morning, Andrew. Hello, everyone.
Great. So over the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to talk a little bit about the rankings, how they're put together, what they provide, how people can break down and look at some of the individual data points, what else they might need to think about in terms of making a decision about whether, where, and exactly what to study if they're interested in an MBA or indeed other business qualifications that the FT ranks or tries to assess each year. But do please continue to send in your reflections, experiences, and particularly your questions for Leo and myself over the coming minutes to help guide our conversations. But Leo, first of all, I mean, just tell us a little bit. So we just published our latest annual ranking earlier this month. That's outside our paywall. Anyone can Google it and have a look and go through the data and the trends. Tell us a little bit for you, what are perhaps some of the key trends and findings this year?
Well, thank you, Andrew. Well, definitely some interesting findings in this latest edition of our MBA ranking. First, it's important to mention the return of US schools to the top of the table. Wharton, Columbia, Harvard, Stanford, MIT. We had 10 American schools in the top tier compared with 7 last year. And they are alumni with the highest average salaries 3 years after graduation. We also noticed an increase in the total MBA intake for most of ranked schools, which indicates a strong demand for MBAs, even with the pandemic around. Another interesting fact is a growing focus on sustainability. Approximately a third of the ranked schools reported that they had completed a carbon emission audit on their campuses, and an increase in the number of hours, average hours dedicated to ESG, environmental, social, and governance. In terms of demographics, we also noticed a higher number of Asia Pacific students going into MBAs, which is now slightly higher than North Americans. And we noticed a decrease in the number of graduates going into finance and banking, whereas consultancy is growing consistently over years. So I believe, these are the main points. Do you remember anything else, Andrew?
Yeah, and we'll certainly come back to some of the reflections and questions that people have raised. As you say, certainly responsibility, climate change, which seems to be a growing aspect of interest by students as well as faculty, and clearly schools are responding with development of institutes and specialist courses, and indeed sometimes even specialist qualifications. And we've tried to track that at least by some of the data points that are a little bit more comparable and measurable. And as you say, of course, there was a period of disruption during COVID when a number of the business schools held back from engaging with the rankings, which obviously requires some considerable work and data collection on their part as well as ours. So it's been really good now to see as they're evolving, consolidating, surviving as we move hopefully towards the end of the pandemic. They've been keen as well to return to that debate. But let's perhaps we might start, Leo, with some of the questions. Great to see some of those coming in, and do please add yours as we go through. So I see there's one here, Leo. According to the FT rankings, London Business School and University of Chicago was second and third in 2021, and they're down this year to 7th and 8th. So was this due to COVID?
Well, not necessarily. only due to COVID. You know, our rankings, we have a number of metrics and they have weights. And of course, we deal with two different types of data, alumni data and the school data. So, you know, each, for example, salary has a weight and so on. And we use Z scores to calculate our rankings. So the data is relative to other schools and the data provided by alumni and the schools as well. So not only COVID, but every year, you know, the data is different. So COVID, of course, has an impact, but not only that. So we invite people to check our methodology on our website to check the weights and how we compile our table.
And there's a wider. In fact, I had only just this morning a prospective student emailed me and was sort of expressing a bit of confusion, perhaps, or frustration that sometimes the order given in our and other business school rankings didn't necessarily correspond with the kind of informal qualitative discussions and feedback he got from some individual schools and students. Any thoughts you have on kind of how to interpret the limitations, the nuances of ours and other rankings in students trying to make that choice of where to study?
Yes, the rankings has its value, but it shouldn't be the only source of information, I would say. Yeah, so we can talk about our website where students can download data we have available. Um, and of course, you know, it's always important to talk to people as well, like all the graduates, to understand what they will learn and so on. But in terms of our data, yes, of course, we're still giving a lot of, we are reviewing our methodology, but yeah, there is a lot of information there that should be taken into account. So our rankings, we have weights for each metric, and yes, I think there is you can play with our website and check what is more important for you in terms of, you know, the data we have available in our tables.
Yeah, I think it's an important point, isn't it? As you say, Leo, the reality is that no data and no individual ranking can provide a full picture. And I think
Yeah,
anyone, and we certainly see it, don't we, in our surveys when we engage with alumni and others, that they do place significant weight on the rankings, and quite rightly, because we
yeah,
certainly invest a lot of time in trying to produce them and make them useful. But everyone has different priorities and
yeah,
approaches. Clearly, you might be making a decision based on whether you want to do part time or full time, whether you want to be continuing to work, what the nature is of the possibilities for online and hybrid versus face to face experience. Obviously, kind of where your physical location is and how willing you are to travel elsewhere, or what sort of business culture you want to engage with in terms of the nature of faculties and other students and the networks they have with organizations where there are placements, internships, trips, and so on. And then, of course, the nature of the subjects themselves, where there will be different levels of options and core components in the courses, the use of case studies versus simulations and class lectures and capstone projects and so on. So in the content, in the style, in the format, in the pricing, the duration, there are an awful lot of different nuances. And so we try to capture at a high level in aggregate form our assessment of the top rankings. But first of all, and we've launched, haven't we, Lou, a new platform that hopefully over time will allow people to drill deeper into the individual data points that they want. That's part of the way to kind of analyze and disaggregate and personalize people's choices. But then, of course, the FT and others do a wide range of more qualitative reporting and analysis on big trends on individual examples, on case studies, profiles of individual faculty and students and alumni, which give a sense of the variety. And then, of course, rankings and our journalism and that of others is also only part of a decision, which is a very significant one involving considerable sacrifice of time and funding and money and so on. And therefore, also, it's really important to reach out both to the potential schools themselves, but
yeah,
also, of course, to other alumni and contacts that you might find independently through LinkedIn or elsewhere that you can talk to build up your own fuller picture of people's experiences, how it was like, and so on.
Yeah, I
I don't know if you
believe
want to
some
say,
of you. Yeah,
go
I
ahead,
believe some
go
of
ahead.
you had the opportunity to access our new rankings website. We've been working on it since 2020 to make it more interactive and easy to use. The way it's now organized definitely helps with more useful benchmarking and analysis of the data available. We have historic data that can be easily downloaded in Excel or PDF. And yes, as you said, the team is working to implement new tools to make it even more interesting, for the users. And people can also check information about methodology, how we compile our tables, the weights we give for each of the metrics to consider in our rankings. And I think this is very interesting. There is a section called a school directory with specific information and statistics of each school ranked. So please check, please use the website and give us feedback.
And there's a question here, Leo, about that. Somebody says they're finding it more difficult now to extract the full data from the website. But I think actually I was just checking. It is possible, isn't it? I mean, both
Yes.
to
Yes, you just have to
download.
go, to the columns and add all the data you want, or play with the filters as well. And then you can import in Excel or in PDF. I think the way it's now, it's actually easier because you can download
Yes,
the previous years as well and do some sort of comparisons and benchmarking.
exactly. I'm just looking here at the website, and at the top below the MBA 22, you can see there are show more filters and show more
Yeah,
columns. So you can click on
yeah,
those to add or remove all sorts of different data points that we
exactly.
include in the rankings. And then just below that, before the actual table of the ranked schools themselves, there's a download function which allows you either in PDF or CSV form to in
Or yes,
spreadsheets
or in
to
Excel.
collect that data and then play with it as you want. So there's a lot of individual data points which you can then go on to re-rank and prioritize as you choose.
And
There's
we
a question
also
here also.
invite,
Go ahead, go ahead.
sorry, no, we just also invite people to check the methodology because it explains very well how we compile our table with all the information we need, the reader needs to, to understand how we compile it.
Yes, and there's a question here on that. So is there a possibility that the how the rankings are calculated will change in the near future? I heard that going forward there may be less weight on the salary after graduation. And what other changes can we expect?
Yes, every year, as we publish the ranking, we publish an updated methodology as well with the correct weights and so on. So as we progress with our methodology review, which is an ongoing process, we always publish the methodology as well, on what changed and how we calculate the metrics as well.
Yes, and our methodology for the MBA has included essentially around 40% of the total goes to salary
Salary and
related
salary increase. Yeah.
insights currently from alumni, but we have said that we are likely to be reducing that weighting as we try to reprioritize some other areas, including around responsible business and climate and sustainability related topics. So
Yeah.
that's a work in process that we're engaging with the schools. We're very open and interested in different opinions. So if you watching have ideas, we try to poll regularly our alumni and our readers more generally, and so we're always interested in realistic data that is possible to collect and compare between different schools around the world that will provide the most useful rankings or individual data items that are possible. There's a question also here, Leo, actually slightly related to that, uh, around response rates in the alumni survey, which provides, alongside responses from the schools, a number of the data points. So the argument is that potentially a lower response rate could lead to unequal treatment of data from the alumni survey. Do you want to explain how that's prevented?
Yeah, yes. Basically, we have a threshold. So for each school, we need at least 20 completed surveys from each school, or 20% depending on the number of respondents or the alumni the school sends to us. So we carefully check this threshold, this limit of the minimum of students or the minimum of respondents we have per school in order to have something robust. And this is something that we are constantly monitoring. We know that in all sorts of surveys response rates are going down and down, but this is something we check in order to keep the robustness of our data, of our results.
There's another question here moving a little bit onto the sort of the back end, as it were, the nitty gritty of how we're collecting the data. So the FT invests a lot of time, and also the business schools themselves, time and resources in preparing the data that go into our rankings. Can you talk about how you work with business schools to arrive at the quantifiable metrics that we rank?
So basically, our rankings are based on two main data sets. Yeah, one is the data provided by schools, for that specific rank, that specific round, where we have information about faculty, anything related to enrollment and so on, and the data provided by another survey we do with alumni that graduated 3 years before the year of the ranking. Yeah. So this is how we compile our data, two surveys. It's a time consuming. It's a lot of work related to data checks and so on. We have a data consultant that helps with with all the checks and so on. But yes, it's a endless communication with schools and participants of that specific route, the MBA in the case we are talking about now. But and we are always trying to improve the platforms we use for data collection. So this is part of our methodology review as well.
Yes, I think we're very mindful of and grateful to cooperation with the business schools, as well
Yeah.
as, of course, the resources that the FT commits to it to sort of clean and analyze and prepare the data. But happily, I think the business schools, as well as the FT, do see this as a really important service to allow for differentiation, for benchmarking, to provide a guide both for prospective students, for faculties and business schools themselves in benchmarking, and to the organizations, employers, recruiters that the business schools engage with, which is clearly also as an essential part and value that people get out of rankings. So I see there's also a question here about whether we take into account the international student cohorts in our rankings, Leo.
Yes. This is one of the questions we have in our questionnaire. Yeah, so for the schools, we have a number of, I think this is the part of diversity, the number of women students, the international students. So this is part of and it goes to the calculation of the ranking.
Yes, so we take into account actually both the international and indeed the gender split, both for
Yeah.
students and for faculty, as well as
And
advisory
faculty,
boards.
correct.
Yes,
Yeah.
when we're considering it. So there are different sort of ways in which we're trying to analyze the richness and variety of the nature of the classes and the faculty and the experiences that students will have. There's a question here. You explained you'll be reprioritizing in favor of responsible business. Do you mean this would be what graduates say about the businesses they work in, or business schools' own teaching and focus? I could perhaps briefly say, I mean, I think our focus is always going to be on the nature of what the business schools provide, or the business school
Correct.
output in the form of graduates are, if you like. We do already, and we continue to track and may try to look at new ways to look at both the past employment experiences and sectors of students coming in, but also where they go after graduating. One of the challenges, though, is, of course, people may be working on responsible business, on sustainability, but it's not necessarily that something in their job title or something that people would necessarily associate with the wider organization they're working for. So it's quite a complex area once you move beyond. It's difficult enough trying to assess sustainability in the curriculum or the activities of business schools. It's still more complex when you try to track that to the world and the activities of alumni after they finish, but certainly always open to suggestions around that.
Oh, definitely. Yes, and if you have any suggestions, because we are reviewing methodologies and so on, please write to business.education@ft.com.
So, Leo, I think that's a perfect call for insights and reflections that we're always keen to hear from. We're going to move now on to our next session, but thank you very much. So do please
Thank you.
continue with your feedback and support.
Thank you very much.